All right, folks, we'll get rolling here. So Jason is going to hit the last hour of our workshop. First hour, we talked about sort of the fundamentals of intelligence and how that complements the sort of traditional identity and access management solutions we have today. What's missing in IAM, solving the complexity chasm, getting our iteration cycles to be much faster than they are today. Then Jason saw how the bad guys sort of exploit some of the challenges we have in our world. And what he's going to show now is a little bit of background on what a risk assessment looks like, and then he's going to drop into a demo and sort of show us how it's done and the kinds of things that we can uncover. And we'll do a little bit of role play back and forth. I've got my script written down over here so I can play my role. All right, Jason.
All right. So we had actually thought about trying to do this live for somebody at some point, but we didn't want to air anybody's dirty laundry, so we're going to use some test data we have. And Brian is going to play the role of the security administrator for Contoso Inc. So when we go in to do an access risk quick scan using our Access Insight product, it's typically a one-day engagement. A lot of times we get through it a lot faster. It takes us probably an hour or so to get the data into the tool. We'll spend some time with you guys doing classification to say, these are all my employee accounts. These are all the high-level groupings. And then we'll present a findings report of the things that we've uncovered towards the end of the day. So we have put together a findings report for Contoso Inc., which we'll go through, and then after that we'll go into a demo of the product, and we'll show some of the underlying data that we used to compile the report. So if any of you are here for Brian's presentation at the beginning, some of these slides will be a little bit redundant to that at the beginning of this, but I'll go through them a little bit quickly. So the problem with traditional identity and access management is it only covers the provisioning and governance portions and doesn't allow you to really react quickly to issues that you're finding. And there are trillions of access relationships within a typical organization. So you have thousands to hundreds of thousands of people, which have a large number of access rights per user. And you have your policies and resources as well, and activity data, which causes us to grow very quickly. And the attackers can get into, or once they get into your organization, are typically able to observe, orient, act, and decide quicker than your security teams are using traditional methods. So this is a method that was put together by the military for the Vietnam War. They were losing a lot in dogfights when they had better equipment. And they found that if they were able to take these 4 steps faster than the enemy, they were able to win. So how do we get to a portion, or how do we get to a solution where we're acting faster than the enemy? Currently, we're not. The enemy is able to get in and take advantage of weaknesses within your environment within a low amount of days. And it takes high months or longer for us to catch these things with traditional governance methods. And the bad guys will always win. So Access Insight, with our Access Insight product, we're embedding business intelligence tools and a data warehouse to pull in a lot of this data and allow you to solve these complex problems. We're also applying our industry experience with the ACSC and our traditional, or our focus in the identity and access management space to help solve these problems. With this new technology, you should be able to observe, orient, act, and decide much faster than you were previously, which should allow you to beat the enemies. So what Access Insight does at a high level, we'll put together something like this heat map, which would allow you to see that there's a lot of risk in a specific business unit or whatever the heat map is focused on. If you wanted to take a look at some of the higher risk areas, you can drill into the metrics around those, and then from there into the specific dashboards and visualizations behind them. And from there, if you wanted to take a look at the access for a specific user or account, you can drill down and see how all of the relationships are linked for that specific person or account. So in our quick scan, we focus on 4 main areas which allow you to get quick value out of the product. So orphan accounts, abandoned accounts, unnecessary entitlements, and privileged access. We're able to give quick visibility in these areas. What do we want to do beyond a quick scan? So the tool also allows you to do continuous monitoring for each of these and other problems. It allows you to continuously reduce the threat and identify these risks as they pop up, and helps you to define your policies and implement short and long-term controls to address the issues. So what did we find at Contoso? We found that they have a little over 8,000 objects in their Active Directory environment, including about 6,500 user accounts, most of which are disabled. It looks like you guys must never delete accounts after people get terminated. They just shut them off. Yep. And about 600 computers. So there are a large number of accounts that that don't seem to be user accounts, or maybe they're external people who you guys don't give devices to. And about 26%, or a little more than a quarter of those, are also disabled, so they're not allowed to connect to the network anymore. And there are about 1,200 Active Directory groups, so about twice the number of computers, but significantly less than the number of user accounts that you have. Of those, about 500 of them don't have anybody in them. Do you guys ever clean up groups?
Typically, no.
Okay.
So we take people out of groups, but we don't typically remove them because they may be used by apps that can't afford to break our business.
Yep, so you don't have the visibility into what those things give access to, or if anybody's using them any longer. And then we found an additional 114, which you'll probably also want to review, that just have a single person in them. Maybe they're for projects where most of the people have left or been taken out of them. They're things that you might also be able to remove. So of the 6,000 accounts that we found, we categorized about 99% of them. So when we came in, we worked with you and we identified some rules to identify your contractor accounts, your employee accounts. You have separate rules for people who are IT administrators. So we set up a category for those as well. So you might have different policies that you apply to each of these categories, and that's why we wanted to give you kind of that insight.
Yeah, we took a pretty rough cut through this of looking at who are contractors versus employees versus test accounts.
Yep.
And the rules that we wrote had, we're working off of a variety of different kinds of attributes on these objects. So
Right.
we weren't looking at a specific attribute. We might, for our test accounts, the test accounts may start with the TST underscore, things of that nature, or might be in a specific OU in the domain.
Right. So we also found that the max nesting depth was 6 deep, so a group inside of a group inside of a group, and so on and so forth. It's it must be pretty hard to get visibility into what people actually have access to within the
That's the
organization.
manual task to explode that. What do you see in your experience with customers? Is that normal or is that high? Well, it says high, so I'm assuming.
Yeah, that's high.
What do you normally see on average?
We typically see probably 4 or a little bit lower. We'd like to see 2. It gets you to a place where you can have a lot better insight into what granting a group actually does, granting access to a group actually does. So specifically for, we looked at the four main areas that are part of the quick scan, so abandoned accounts, orphan accounts, unnecessary entitlements, and privileged access. And in the abandoned accounts, we found that 652 of your accounts, or 45%, haven't logged in 30 days or more. Is that a little higher than you
That's
expected, maybe?
surprising.
Yeah.
That tells me I probably also have licenses purchased that I maybe don't need.
Right. So out of those, 190 of them have never logged in. So somebody provisioned the access, maybe for somebody who
logged
never
in,
started.
never ever used.
Yep, never ever used. And an additional 102 haven't been used in a year or more. So
So we should turn those off and see who complains.
yes.
Yeah.
And some, including both the response and the NAS admin account, haven't logged in for over 3 years. It looks like you might have retired some applications or something at some point, and those accounts are still hanging around. And we found 649 of those accounts all belong to contractors. So it looks like you might have some issues around contractor terminations.
Yeah.
So
Or
that might,
contractors doing work.
yes,
Never
or
logged
that. So yeah, 164 of them, you provisioned the access, but they never started working, so hopefully you're not paying them. So for privileged access, we looked at kind of a limited set of groups, built-in Active Directory ones. We can configure any ones that you're interested in looking at. So if you have some additional finance-related groups or something that gives access to intellectual property within your organization, you can configure those within the application. We can look at who has access to those things and how they get access through nesting as well. So we found 68 people have, or 68 accounts have privileged access. Is that in line with what you'd expect, or?
Well, my security team's about 5 people now, so that's higher than I would expect.
Okay. I mean, some of them are service accounts and stuff as well.
Okay, so if you roll applications in, probably still high.
Yeah, but we did see that there were a lot of user accounts that had privileged access that probably shouldn't, based on 5 security
Yeah.
administrators. So we also found that there were these 2 accounts, DMZ service and that other account, that haven't reset their passwords in over 7 years. Do you have IT administrators that have left in that time? Do they maybe know the passwords to those things?
We absolutely have. We have that and applications that one of those looks like an application
Yep.
that's been retired.
Yep.
Yeah.
But who set it up?
I actually kind of recognize some of this data, so.
All right.
Looks like it's based on something pseudo-real, yeah.
So the key takeaways that we'd like to, or that we have out of this are, you should probably start to monitor some of these things continually, review your abandoned accounts, make sure all those contractors still work for the organization, things like that. And from here, we really want to go into a demo and show you some of the underlying data.
Yeah, and so this is, it's an interesting point because there's a question in the previous workshop that was asked about, so when you find things, what does remediation mean, right? So remediation can mean more than just, review. It could be business process changes, it could be, actions, decommissioning accounts, decommissioning access, maybe making a change to the way that we manage parts of our infrastructure and people.
All right, so let me just pull up your data here, and then we'll go through some of the underlying things in these visualizations. Okay, I have this up from a little while ago, so let's just refresh it and make sure we haven't timed out here. Okay, so.
Can you folks see that all right? You want to zoom it?
Okay. All right. So what we're looking at here, we're looking at some of these, or we're looking at each of the 4 areas over time. So abandoned accounts, and we ran this for a couple days in your organization. Typically, if we come in to do a quick scan, we'll just do a 1-day snapshot. But if you were to run the application for a longer period of time, like we've done for you, you'd start to see how some of these things start to trend. So you can see here, currently you have the 652 abandoned accounts that we were just talking about. If we want to start to see what those are, we can click on the title here and drill into the dashboard behind it. And that'll give us some more data, some more data and some more insight into what these accounts actually are. So we have a breakdown here by the number of large buckets of the number of days unused up in the top left, those categories that we set up in the bottom left, and then how many are on each target system, and then the scatter plot in the top right shows a bubble for each account and how many entitlements they have and how many days it's been since they logged in. So we can click on any of these things to start to filter it down. So if we want to start to look at the contractor problem here.
Contractor problem? Is that what it's called? Yeah.
Yep, we can start to, or we can click on that and that'll filter the rest of the panels on here. So you can see that you have 164 contractors that have never logged in. So if we want to start taking a look at some of these accounts, we can look at Kay Schwartz here, who hasn't logged in 470 days.
Yeah, and
do you
she was
know?
on a project that's finished.
Okay.
So that's a hole in our offboarding.
Okay, so her account never got terminated, and she still has a fair amount of access in the organization. Yep.
Yeah, and and this is a common thing that we see in the customer base too, is that contractors are nearly always special cased.
Mm-hmm.
They fall outside of the traditional business processes that would onboard and offboard and manage access
Yep.
Consistently. So they are typically, it's very common to find this kind of stuff going on.
All right. And how about S. Roman hasn't logged in 95 days?
Stanley is doing our exchange migration, so yeah, so he should be, I would expect, logging in.
Okay.
More frequently.
But he hasn't logged in a while.
Yeah.
So hopefully you're not getting billed for his time.
Yeah, and then in the previous section, or in the first session, if you guys, for folks that weren't there, we were talking about an example where, with this kind of analytic, we layered in Chronos data, and that flagged, you could start to see people who were taking 2-hour lunch breaks as their activity dipped mid-afternoon.
Yep. So if we wanted to drill into any of these other these other groupings here too, we can click on these to filter down the data further. So if you just want to see the ones that haven't logged in a year or more, we could do that. And you can click on any of these to drive into that at the Access Explorer, which lets you see all of the things that they have access to. So if we were to install this permanently, we'd probably also want to set up a policy to get alerted or create a certification round if these accounts go over the threshold. So if they haven't logged in a while, you can have their manager attest to whether or not they're necessary, or at least know that you need to shut them off. So we can,
getting back to what's the remediation look like? We also found examples of where remediation was attestation, and all that happened was, this was in healthcare, right?
Yep.
What was happening with the managers? They were just going, yep, they
Yep,
need it,
so-
yep, they need it, yep, they need it, for
Yep.
years, and the accounts hadn't been used in
Right.
years. Yeah.
Yep. So we had a customer who went and screamed at a couple of people for rubber stamping certification rounds. So let's go take a look at your orphan accounts next. So we talked about this a little bit when we went through the report. So you have two main categories in here, or two main groupings. So the missing identity accounts in here are the kind of the traditional orphan definition. They're accounts that we can't associate with a person.
Right.
And then we also have these inactive identity accounts, which are accounts that we have associated with somebody who has been terminated, but the accounts are still active. So we can drill into either of these, and then you'll see the breakdown by those categories that we set up earlier.
Right.
And if you wanted to see specifically maybe your partner accounts or contractor accounts, which should probably have a person associated with them.
Or in my example, right, service account, the purple, right, that's my application accounts that are unknown, on no responsible party.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And you can see in here that there are a number of these accounts that aren't associated with anybody and also aren't being logged into. Those are things you should probably take a look at and see if they're really necessary anymore.
All right.
Okay. So let's go back. So we talked about the privileged access a little bit too when we brought up the report, and you said that you only have 5 security admins.
Correct.
And you were a little surprised to see that there were a lot more accounts that had access. So in here we have a breakdown of what these accounts are and how they're getting access through either nesting or direct assignment. We'll show you which entitlements have the largest number of accounts in them. So you have a lot of people in the administrators group. Let's take a look at that. So you have about 67 people who have administrative level access. Based on this, it looks like a lot of them have access through nesting rather than through direct assignment.
Purple line.
Yep.
I'm looking there, I can look right here.
So do you think you have a good handle around the nesting complexity? And,
If I manually go look, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the hard piece to unravel.
Yeah.
For sure.
So it looks like there may be a lot of people that are in a group that is nested inside of this administrators
Right.
group, and it's kind of obscuring the access. So and a lot of these haven't had their passwords reset in a long time, like we talked about briefly during the report, or during the findings report. Yep. So there are some of these that haven't had their passwords reset in several years.
Including one in the DMZ I just saw.
Yep. So do you have a policy around those?
We have a corporate policy for password change, but apps and administrators oftentimes fall outside.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you can get to those categories we set up. You can get to those in here through the detailed data grid as well. So those are included in this export. So if you wanted to filter down to a specific set of accounts that you wanted to look at and then export them, you can see which ones are service, which are associated with your IT admins, and ones that might be contractor accounts or other inappropriate administrative level access. The final area that we had were the unnecessary entitlements. So these were the groups with either 0 users or a single person in them. And you had said you didn't really have a good process to go about cleaning these up right now. So we found several in each of the domains we scanned. There's a breakdown here of over time how many are completely empty versus how many have just a single person in them. And you can get at the list in here as well to start to see which ones that you should be cleaning up.
So I know on the home dashboard, right?
Yep.
I see red lines and green lines. Are those sort of the goals where I should be, I'd like to be?
Yep.
Typically?
So we have key performance indicators, or these KPIs on the main homepage for each of these 4 areas, and we've defined thresholds for them, and those are configurable. So you could change them if you thought that a higher number or lower number was typical for your organization. But you basically set those as a goal, and you want to get down to those by taking some remediation steps.
Yeah. So from a monitoring perspective, how do I how do I get notified? Let's
Yep.
say if
So,
new orphans appear or orphans exceed threshold or something like that.
right, because once you start to clean some of these things up, you're going to want to make sure that you keep them down at the lower level,
Right, yeah.
lower levels and detect new problems. So you can come into our manage policy screen, and in here there are a number of policies that you can pick from. We can also build out new ones as additional content if you had a different problem that you wanted to solve.
Yeah.
And you can come in here, and if you want to be notified when a new orphan account shows up, you just select who you want to notify. You can also create a certification round if you wanted to have somebody attest to the necessity of that account. So you just select the person that you want to notify or the review cycle you want to kick off, and then save it, and this will run every time the warehouse is updated.
All right, so this gets back to that, how do we iterate faster and start to close that gap around the time it takes us to observe and act? And so what that'll do, as we're configuring policies here, that will allow the system to detect these kinds of anomalies, these kinds of trends, or variations from the KPIs that we care about, and then notify somebody and act. And in that case, that example, that was requiring a manager or some owner, some responsible party to review an orphan that appears. And typically, that's not a great example, because the whole reason that an orphan appears, or is called an orphan, is because it doesn't have a manager. Those events typically go to somebody in the IT or security group.
Right.
That's where those would route. But if we had a contractor or worker with excessive access, or somebody who hadn't logged in, that kind of certification review would go off to a manager, because there would be typically an owner for that person.
Yep. All right. So we also, since we loaded all the identities in here, we can associate all the accounts from all of the systems that we're looking at with a particular user. So if we wanted to do that, we could go into the Access Explorer here and search for a particular user and see all of their accounts. So we were speaking earlier with Brad Montoya.
Yeah.
So let's
And
take
also
a
speaking of the Princess Bride, yeah.
Yep. So let's take a look at what the access is that Brad has. Whoops, if I could type. Okay, so,
And that's pretty, is that good?
hmm?
I said that looks pretty, is that good?
Yeah, so Brad has about 5 accounts within your organization on different target systems, and you can start to see what all the access he has is on each of those targets. And if you wanted to see some of the nesting here, you can start to drill down through this to get at what he really has on the outlying things that he has.
Right, so there were 4 or 5 deep in that chain?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're 4 deep right now. So, and then you can surf back and look at his other accounts and what access those accounts have as well. So, it's a quick way to start to get around and see what a particular user has.
Yeah. And so can I do the flip side of that? Can I look at a security group and find the people
Yep.
attached to that?
So if you wanted to look at a particular group, let's look at the sales group here. We'll just take Brad out of there and search for entitlements. Let's see, we'll use this one. So you can see who all the people that have access to that, and in this case, it looks like they all have direct access, but if we picked a group that had nesting, you'd see the users connected to another group and then connected to this one.
Cool.
All right. So, Is there anything else that you wanted to look at in
No,
here?
that's plenty.
All right.
Plenty for me to act on.
All right. So we typically do these in a few hours to a day within an organization. You can set up the same content to run continuously over time as well. And there are other pieces of content that you can add within the product, like the file share related stuff you were talking about in your earlier presentation. There are a number of other pieces of content that we can provide, and we're building new ones as well that can be installed through this Managed Intelligent Definition screen. So we're working on building standardized things to solve particular problems across multiple customers and industries. Once we build them, you can drop them in here and install them to look at the data a different way to solve a different problem. All right.
Yeah, and these four, like we talked about in the earlier session, these four are typically where we recommend starting, because this gives people a lot of visibility pretty quickly into some very basic things that have a large influence on the risk that they're carrying. And there's, how many analytics do we have now?
Probably 20 something.
So there's other analytics depending on what the business needs and what it values and the cost of gathering the data that sits behind these analytics. Something like a quick scan, something you can do on the order of a day, may have more or less content here and more or less information in it. But typically, these are the four that we start with because they're high value and they apply pretty much to every customer that we encounter.
Yep. All right.
Okay.
Any questions? Okay. Let's see. Just open this back up here. So there are a couple other sessions happening this week as well. Let me open this up. So we have two sessions on Monday, one led by Kurt Johnson, our VP of Corporate Strategy, related to the problem around the explosion of access within an organization. We'll also have a demo booth or at the expo, and do we know what's going on with, yeah. So there is also another customer who's supposed to speak, but has come down with an illness. So hopefully Tim Callahan will be joining us on Monday as well to go over an intelligent approach to identity and access governance.
Some questions from folks? The content stuff that Jason was showing, we were talking about it with some folks up here earlier. There's really, there's two directions that the content is going in. One is the breadth of what it can look at. And so from a breadth perspective, oops. You think about something like Orphans, whether you're looking at a clinical app, a financial app, or an operating system, Orphans and Abandoned is pretty important. So that's one dimension where these analytics will continue to expand, is just continuing to look at new systems and plugging the data right into these analytics. The other dimension is around the analytics and the algorithms themselves that are being calculated. So Abandoned and Orphan, those are two very different calculations. You can imagine that when we go into a financial app or a clinical app, there's a completely different kind of analytic that we want to do. And that's going deeper with a little bit more expertise, a little bit more domain expertise into a particular area. That's the other dimension that these types of solutions will expand into. Breadth to cover more for the analytics that you have, and then creation of new analytics that help you look at different things. And the third dimension to this is the visuals. So you saw some graphs and pie charts and the Access Explorer that shows you the relationships and lets you navigate. But as you start to uncover new and interesting things, then the visuals become more and more important, because what you don't want to do, and we actually had some of these in here when we were looking at the actual hard data that sits behind these things, showing people a report or a grid of data is not that interesting, right? But when you can start to see, so showing a number of 10 orphans or showing all 10 orphans doesn't tell me a heck of a lot. But when you can start to see a visual like this and say, well, I see 10 orphans, but over time I've kind of been at steady state of 10, so my risk profile is probably about the same, that becomes interesting. If I can see an uptick or a downtick, that's even more information that I can use in my business. So the visuals is really the third dimension that's interesting here, which is how do I take all this analytics and present it in a way that gives me a concise view of some information, then I can make a quick decision about whether I need to go in and investigate more. Right? So any questions from you folks about what you saw today or how it works? Or feel free to swing by the booth or catch us around the show floor if you have some more questions. All right, great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.